Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at opposition to the Nazis. Before we get started, a quick reminder of how helpful it is if you like these videos and subscribe to the channel or share them in some other way. It's often difficult for me to monetize or promote these videos because of the subject matter, so any way that you can help me would be really appreciated and would help other students as well. Let's get into it. Have a look at this very famous photograph of a crowd all performing the Nazi salute. I say all, there's one man who isn't. So how do we actually interpret this picture? On the one hand, we can admire the bravery of the man who's choosing not to follow the crowd and is choosing to have his own quiet bit of resistance to the Nazis. On the other hand, we could look at this from a slightly hopeless point of view and think that while that is an act of resistance, it wouldn't have actually changed anything. And then from a final point of view, we could consider that that is just one man out of a much bigger crowd. So perhaps opposition was unusual, and perhaps it was useless. But whatever your opinion, opposition to the Nazis did exist, and we're going to have a look at that in this lesson. Firstly, we need to consider levels of support. The sad fact is that the Nazis always had high levels of support and conformity, or at least enough control to prevent opponents from effectively striking at them. That's why it took a world war to defeat them. The Nazis won 44% of the vote in March 1933, although admittedly that wasn't a truly free election. Goebbels ran an effective propaganda machine, convincing many people to agree with the Nazis. And Himmler operated a system of terror that kept people in line. Nazi policies which ended up increasing employment were actually very popular as well. And Hitler's defiance of the Treaty of Versailles was also popular. However, there were key areas of opposition and resistance, as we'll see today. Types of opposition. One type of opposition was through trade unions. Although these were officially banned, some workers still resisted through slow work and sabotage, perhaps being off sick for work. Another was through the army. Hitler's rearmament programs made him popular with many in the army, but some officers, like Ludwig Beck, who's pictured here, objected to the warmongering and planned to kill or overthrow Hitler. Beck indeed invited the British to invade Germany, saying that the German army would not resist them. It's unlikely that this would have been the case, and the British didn't take him up on it anyway, probably not thinking it was serious. There was also political opposition. Hitler's ban on opposition parties made this very difficult, but some members of the Socialist Party continued to produce illegal newspapers or resist from abroad. This cartoon here, showing Hermann Goering as an executioner with the Reichstag on fire behind, was produced by John Hartfield, or, as he might be known, Helmut Herzfeld by his German name. He emigrated away from Germany. There was also youth opposition. Rebellious youngsters refused to conform with Nazi ideas. And lastly, church opposition. Some religious leaders preached against Hitler. Some did so in secret, others took the risk of open opposition. We're going to start with youth opposition. From 1936, all young people were supposed to belong to one of the Nazi youth organisations like the Hitler Youth. However, some rebellious and frustrated young people refused to conform. One of these groups was the so-called Edelweiss Pirates. These were city gangs of teenagers that had their own local identity too, like the Travelling Dudes in Essen. They rejected the military discipline of the Nazis. They grew longer hair. Boys and girls mixed freely and went on hikes, singing songs and mocking the Nazis. They sometimes even attacked the Hitler Youth, especially after the start of World War II. Another group were the swing groups. I'm pretty sure that this swing group here is from the 1950s, so after World War II, but it's illustrative of the idea. These wealthier teenagers adopted American clothes and music such as jazz and swing. They played illegal records and organised dances, some of which were very well attended. Himmler said that they deserved to be beaten and then put to hard labour. But was youth opposition effective? In truth, youth resistance was very limited. Edelweiss Pirates only really ramped up their vandalism and physical attacks after the war began in 1939. Some of them were treated very harshly. 12 of them were executed in public in Cologne in 1944 to set an example. Also, the swing groups. They were mostly concerned about fashion and culture. Although this was rebellious, it didn't represent serious political opposition. In both cases, the numbers involved were always very small. They were not typical of the German youth. 8 million children were in the Hitler Youth or associated organisations, compared to just about 2,000 in the Edelweiss Pirates. What about church opposition? The Nazis tried to exert pressure on Christians through the Reich Church and the Concordat Agreement with Pope Pius XI, and by closing religious schools. However, some clergy were motivated by their faith to resist. One group was the Pastors' Emergency League, or PEL. Some Protestants, most famously Martin Niemöller, who's pictured, set up the PEL. The PEL resisted joining the Reich Church and continued to allow Jews to become Christians and to preach the Old Testament. There was also the Confessing Church. The PEL set up this Protestant church in opposition to the Reich Church. About 6,000 pastors joined it, defying the Nazis openly or in secret. 800 of them would be sent to concentration camps eventually. And then there was Catholic opposition. Despite the agreement in 1933 not to interfere in politics, this was known as the Concordat, some priests condemned the Nazis. 400 or so Catholic priests were imprisoned. So was church opposition actually effective? Martin Niemöller himself can tell us quite a lot about how effective church opposition really was. This is his most famous quote. "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." However, Niemöller's relationship with the Nazis was more complex. At face value, he might have been expected to be a Nazi. He was a World War I veteran, a former submarine commander, who believed in strong government, and he welcomed Hitler's seizure of power at first. He did not actually resist most actions that the Nazis took against Jewish people, just the fact that they were forbidden from joining his church. He even offered to fight in World War II when he was imprisoned and realised that he was in danger. However, as he joined the PEL and began to openly question Nazi ideas, he was put under Gestapo surveillance and arrested several times. He therefore realised that Hitler was a dictator who needed to be stopped. He was sent to Sachsenhausen and Dachau concentration camps, and he was freed from Dachau in 1945. Ultimately, most church opposition was against Nazi restrictions on the church, not resistance to Nazi crimes against humanity, and there is a distinction there. Let's summarise our final points. Support for the Nazi regime remained high throughout Hitler's rule. However, there was some opposition. Some workers resisted through sabotage or slow work. Some army officers plotted to remove Hitler, particularly Ludwig Beck. Political opponents continued to produce illegal newspapers and campaign from abroad. Some young people openly rejected the Hitler Youth, adopting American culture or even openly attacking Hitler Youth members. These included the Swing Youth and the Edelweiss Pirates. The church resisted Nazi interference in religion, particularly through the Pastors' Emergency League. However, the truth is resistance and opposition were never typical in Nazi Germany, helping to explain why Hitler was never overthrown by his own people. But why was this? Were people too terrified to resist, or were they persuaded by Nazi propaganda? That's the end of this rapid revision video. I hope it's been useful to you, and if it has, please do like and subscribe to the channel because it does help, it really does. So it would be a good way of saying thank you. In the meantime though, thanks for watching and goodbye.